I was asleep when the calls started coming in. Back-to-back missed calls, texts, then the phone started ringing again. When I answered, I could hear a voice on the other end, but what was even louder was the smoke alarms going off in the background. She was in a panic. She told me the building was on fire and she was knocking on doors trying to make sure everybody was out. My first thought was, is everybody okay? I jumped up, started putting my clothes on, and I headed there. I felt like I was driving for days, but the building was only 15 minutes away. In the entire drive, I had no idea what I was about to pull up to. When I pulled up, the entire street was blocked off. There are 3 or 4 fire trucks, police cars, an ambulance, and people standing outside watching. At this point, I wasn't looking at the building. I was looking at faces, looking around trying to figure out, is everybody out? As I was walking up, an ambulance was pulling away. The paramedic told me 2 adults and 1 child was taken to the hospital. That immediately caught my attention because I knew 2 children lived in the apartment. So I asked, what about the other child? He just looked at me and shrugged like he didn't know. The police were there asking questions. The Red Cross was already helping the residents who had been displaced. The board-up company was already waiting on standby. And then, before I could even process everything that was happening, a guy approached me introducing himself as an insurance adjuster and started explaining how I should hire him. I didn't know where to look. Every time I turned around, something else was going on or somebody else was asking me a question while I was still trying to figure out things myself. Meanwhile, I'm watching the firefighters break every window in the building, breaking the glass in all the entrance doors, knocking out every piece of glass block. And at first it feels like they're destroying the property for no reason. But then I realize they're doing exactly what they need to do to make sure the fire is under control and make sure it doesn't spread. It was dark when I got there. The street lights were still on. And by the time the fire was finally out, the sun was starting to come up. I'll never forget that. Once the fire department gave the all clear, they started escorting residents back into their apartments that weren't directly affected. Just long enough for them to grab what they needed before leaving again. And honestly, I thought the worst was over. The fire department had finished. The residents had grabbed the things they needed. An emergency vehicle started to leave. And I left to take my daughter to school. On the drive, I finally had a chance to breathe. I was already thinking about what needed to happen next. Insurance, securing the building, figuring out where everybody was going to stay. Then I got another text. Someone sent me a video, so I open it. Fire is shooting out from the 2nd and 3rd floors, right above the apartment where the fire originally started. I couldn't believe what I was looking at. The fire had rekindled. I turned around and immediately head back. And this time, it was worse. Thankfully, everybody was already out. But we had gone from 1 apartment with fire damage to 3 apartments with extensive fire damage and 3 more with major smoke and soot issues. That's when it really hit me. This wasn't going to be a quick cleanup. This was going to be a complete rehab. Eventually, everything got quiet. The fire department had left. The insurance adjuster had finished documenting the damage. The utility crews were gone. The building was finally secure. I had a set of new keys, and for the first time, I walked through the building alone. The smell hit me immediately. The smoke and soot smell was so strong, I felt like I should have been wearing a mask. I didn't have one, so I didn't stay long. And sometimes I'd leave, and the smoke smell would still be on my clothes. I walked into the 1st floor apartment, and honestly, it didn't even look real. Everything was black. The furniture, the appliances, the personal belongings, everything looked like charcoal. There was a pool of water in the living room, and water still raining in from the ceiling. I just stood there. I couldn't sit because there was nowhere to sit. I couldn't touch anything because everything was covered in soot. I just stood there, frozen, trying to process what I was looking at. And I remember thinking, I don't think I'm going to be able to do this. But I knew I didn't have a choice. My well-being depended on me figuring this out. I had never been through anything like this before. I didn't know what the right order was. I didn't know who I was supposed to call first. I didn't have any emergency playbook sitting in my glove compartment. I was figuring it out one decision at a time. While I was making phone calls and trying to figure out what to do next, the fire department came back. They still hadn't located the other child. The front window of the first floor apartment wasn't boarded up yet, so you could see straight inside. The fire department started searching through the debris. They were still searching where my insurance adjuster and I had left. Later, I finally get the update I was hoping for. They found out the child left the scene with someone earlier and was safe. Everybody was accounted for. And once I knew that, my focus shifted. Now, I needed to protect the property. I called my insurance company and started a claim. I also contacted an insurance adjuster I already knew, and before the board-up company secured everything, he wanted to document the damage. So they waited until he was finished, then started boarding up the building. The roof had holes that couldn't wait for the entire insurance process, so I had people make those repairs immediately. People's gas came out, ComEd came out, the water department came out. Gas, electric, water, everything had to be shut off. And every hour there was another phone call, another question, another decision, another person who needed something from me. And here's something I learned very quickly. The fire may be over, but the emergency isn't. Over the next few days, people kept breaking into the building. At first, I couldn't understand why. I remember thinking there's nothing left to take. Everything was covered in smoke, soot, water, and debris. But it didn't matter. Every time we secured the building, someone else found another way in. I had people come back out at least 3 or 4 times just to make sure the building was secured again. Then I realized boarding up a building is one thing, protecting it is something completely different. So I installed cameras and alarms, and the day the cameras went up, the break-in stopped. And the security wasn't the only secondary problem. It was winter in Chicago. Once the water and heat was shut off, the building needed to be winterized. Unfortunately, the first plumber didn't completely drain the pipes, and I found that out the hard way when pipes started bursting. So now, on top of everything else, I spent part of a brutal Chicago winter dealing with one pipe burst after another. And getting water restored to residents on the unaffected side of the building became its own process that lasted for days. After a major emergency, you're not only dealing with the original damage, you're trying to prevent the next problem from happening too. Once the building was stable, the next question was, who's going to rebuild it? My first thought wasn't, I'm going to be the general contractor. Actually, it was the complete opposite. I reached out to contractors I already knew. At the same time, people would see me at the building and approach me saying they did work there years before and could help. I needed somebody I could trust. But for whatever reason, things just weren't coming together or moving fast enough. I realized waiting became its own problem. Since I already had a GC license, I decided to manage the project myself. At the time, it felt like the best way to get the project moving. Looking back, I'm not sure I'd make the same decision again. And there's a lot of things people don't see when they look at a before and after renovation. The work starts long before the construction begins. Before the demolition, I had 2 or 3 people from practically every trade walking through the building. Demo, plumbing, electric, HVAC, windows, carpentry. Everybody had an opinion and everybody had a price. And those prices could be wildly different. I remember getting an electric estimate that was almost 3 times what 2 other electricians quoted for the same work. So before anything was touched, I was already making decision after decision after decision. Who knows what they're doing? Who can actually finish? Who's priced fairly? Who can start? Who can I trust? And that's when I realized something I don't think people talk about enough. People think rebuilding is all about the construction. It's about making hundreds of decisions when you're already exhausted. When the demolition finally started, something unexpected happened. For the first time, I started feeling a little hopeful. Because before the demo, the building looked like something I'd seen in a movie. Burned furniture, black walls, water, soot, debris. But once all that was removed, I could see open floor plans, framing, structure, things I understood. For the first time, it looked less like a disaster and more like a construction site. That little bit of progress was just enough to keep me moving. But before we could start putting everything back together, smoke remediation. Cleaning up what you actually see isn't enough. Smoke and soot get into surfaces, framing, and areas you wouldn't necessarily think about. HEPA-filtered air scrubbers were used to clean the air. The framing and foundation walls were abraded, HEPA vacuumed, and cleaned with chemicals to remove soot and odors. And finally, the exposed wood framing and foundation walls were encapsulated with a sealer so those smoke odors wouldn't later be released back into the apartments. Before this happened, I didn't know so much was necessary. And looking back on those first days when I was walking around smelling smoke on my clothes, I probably should have had other protective equipment. That's something I handle very differently today. Then we could finally start putting things back together. Plumbing, electric, HVAC, windows, carpentry, drywall, flooring, tile, cabinets, appliances, and the finishes. And remember, I was managing all of it. That meant schedules, deliveries, inspections of work, problems, people not doing what they said they were going to do, things that were supposed to work that didn't, long nights, delays, firing people, people firing themselves, finding replacements, then explaining the project all over again to whoever came next. There were plenty of moments when I just wanted to be done, but I couldn't see exactly when done was going to happen. And there was another part of managing this project that made my job harder. Almost every person I dealt with on the job site was a man. Plumber, the electrician, the carpenter, the demo crew, the window company, appliance delivery, tile installer, glass company, and I could keep going, and that's no surprise. I was walking through a vacant building every day with groups of people I barely knew. Sometimes I was conscious of my own safety. And then there was the other dynamic. A lot of men weren't expecting the person making decisions, giving directions, checking the work, and ultimately paying them to be a woman. I've dealt with that throughout my career, but managing this project made it impossible to ignore. And if I could do this project again, I would stay involved, but I would manage it differently. I would have someone on site as a middleman between me and the trades, while I manage the bigger picture. Because being capable of doing something doesn't mean doing it yourself is the smartest way, unfortunately. The renovation didn't happen all at once. We worked in phases. As apartments were completed, people could start moving back in, and that mattered. Because every completed apartment felt like proof that we could actually get through this. There were setbacks throughout the entire project, but every time something went wrong, eventually, something else moved forward. One room, one apartment, one floor, one decision at a time. Eventually, the apartments that looked completely destroyed looked like homes again. And roughly a year after the fire, the building was fully occupied again. When I look back on that morning now, there are things that I would absolutely do differently. First, secure the property more aggressively from the beginning. Boarding up is important, but also cameras, alarms, and additional protection at vulnerable doors and windows as quickly as possible. Second, that morning people were trying to sell me services when the fire department was still working. An emergency is not the time to let someone else's urgency become mine. I make the calls I needed to make, document everything, contact my insurance company, and most importantly, slow down enough to understand who I was hiring and what I was signing. Third, I think immediately about secondary damage. Water, utilities, weather, security, winterization. The original emergency may be the biggest problem, but it may not be the last one. And finally, I manage my own energy differently. I'm naturally an empathetic person. When I knew people were safe, I still spent a lot of time catering to what everybody else needed. And of course, there's nothing wrong with caring for other people, but I had to understand I couldn't replace anybody's belongings, and I couldn't solve every problem for every person. My responsibility was to manage the situation, protect the property, protect the business, and make the decisions necessary to get everyone through the recovery. And that's something I wish I recognized sooner to eliminate unnecessary stress. Towards the end of the project, I requested the fire department's investigative report. According to the report, the fire originated in the living room of the first floor apartment, and the cause was listed as improper use of smoking materials. Smoking materials aren't the leading cause of residential fires. According to the U.S. Fire Administration, in 2023, of the estimated 344,600 residential fires, 7,000 of those were smoke-related, and nearly 170,000 of those were from cooking. But here's what stood out for me. From 2019 to 2023, smoking materials were involved in about 7% of reported home fires. but accounted for 25% of home deaths. So smoke and related fires may not be among the most common, but when they happen, they can be especially deadly. There are some risks that we cannot eliminate completely, but as property owners, we can think carefully about our policies, our insurance, our emergency plans, so we're prepared if something does happen. I wasn't expecting this, and I wasn't prepared for it. Although I did have insurance, I knew construction, I had years of experience in real estate, I still wasn't prepared for what it felt like to stand inside that destroyed building and realize how many decisions I would need to make next. After the demolition, I remember walking through those open apartments, looking at the framing and realizing, I know what this is. It wasn't the scene from a movie anymore. It was construction, something I understood. And every little bit of progress gave me enough energy to make the next decision. That's really how I got through it. Not because I suddenly knew exactly what to do. I didn't. Not because everything started going right. It definitely didn't. I just kept dealing with whatever direction was in front of me. One decision, then another, until eventually the building I stood inside thinking, I don't think I'm going to be able to do this, was livable again. And everyone had moved in and moved on.